Here's a truth many people are not ready to face. The waiting season in your life may be the exact place where God is doing His most important work. At first, that idea sounds comforting, almost poetic, but the longer you sit with it, the more unsettling it becomes. Because if it is true, then the long stretches where nothing seemed to change, the quiet days where your prayers felt suspended in silence, the months when you wondered if life had somehow stalled, were not empty spaces in your story. Psychologists often describe something called uncertainty intolerance, the deep discomfort people feel when they cannot see progress toward the future they desire. When life slows down, the mind quickly interprets the delay as failure, as stagnation, sometimes even as abandonment. And that is why waiting feels so heavy, because the silence begins whispering questions that disturb your confidence. Maybe you recognize that feeling, a season where you were praying, hoping, trying to stay faithful, and yet nothing moved. Doors stayed closed, answers stayed quiet, time kept passing, and somewhere inside that silence, one uncomfortable question began to form. Why does it feel like my life is standing still? But this is where the deeper story begins. Because what feels like waiting to you may actually be preparation you cannot yet see. Waiting has a strange effect on the human mind. At first, we tell ourselves to be patient. We try to stay calm. We repeat hopeful words. We convince ourselves that the delay is temporary. But as the days stretch into weeks, and the weeks quietly turn into months, something begins to shift inside us. Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, almost invisibly. You start noticing small thoughts appearing where confidence used to live. Maybe the opportunity passed you by. Maybe you misunderstood God. Maybe the moment that was meant for your life has already slipped into someone else's story. And these thoughts are subtle. They do not arrive loudly. They arrive quietly, disguised as realism, disguised as maturity, disguised as accepting things as they are. This is the emotional weight of waiting, not the silence itself, but what the silence begins to convince you about yourself, about your future, about your worth. And this is exactly where many people stop believing. Not because they want to abandon faith, but because the waiting feels like evidence that nothing is happening. But this is where the deeper pattern begins, the part of the story most people never see. Because in the Bible, one of the most important turning points in history began during a season that looked exactly like this. A season where nothing seemed to be moving, yet everything was quietly being arranged. The story unfolds quietly in the ancient Persian Empire, in a palace filled with power, politics, and hidden agendas. A young woman named Esther had already entered the palace, already been crowned queen. Yet at that moment, nothing about her life seemed extraordinary. She was simply living inside a system she could not control, surrounded by decisions made by people far more powerful than she was. And this is what makes the story so fascinating. Because during that time, Esther was not saving a nation. She was not making dramatic moves. She was not standing in front of kings delivering bold speeches. She was waiting, living ordinary days, unaware that the very position she held would soon become the turning point for an entire people. Meanwhile, far beyond her awareness, events were beginning to align. A man named Haman was quietly rising in influence. Bitterness was growing. A dangerous decree was forming, and soon the lives of countless people would hang in the balance. But Esther did not see any of this yet. From her perspective, life probably felt strangely normal, maybe even uncertain. Another day in the palace, another quiet moment where nothing seemed to be changing. And this is the part of the story most people overlook. Because while Esther thought she was simply living through another ordinary season, God was already positioning her for a moment that would change everything. But then, the quiet season suddenly revealed its hidden tension. A decree began to circulate through the empire, a decision shaped by pride, hatred, and political manipulation. Haman's influence had grown strong enough to convince the king to sign an order that would place an entire people under threat. And almost overnight, what had once been a distant political conflict became a personal crisis. Esther's cousin Mordecai learned about the decree, and in that moment, the waiting season that once felt ordinary suddenly became something else entirely: urgent, dangerous, unavoidable. Because Esther was no longer just a young woman living in the palace. She was the only person in a position where she might influence the king's decision. But there was a terrifying problem. Approaching the king without being summoned could mean death, even for the queen. One wrong step could cost her life. And so Esther stood in a moment many people recognize in their own lives, a moment where the future demanded courage, but fear whispered that staying silent would be safer. It was then that Mordecai sent her a message that would echo through history, words that carried both pressure and purpose. What if you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? And suddenly, the years that seemed like quiet waiting, the hidden preparation, the unexpected path that led Esther to the palace, no longer looked random at all. This was the moment when Esther finally understood something most people only realize much later in life. The waiting season had never been empty. Every quiet year, every unexpected turn, every moment that once felt like delay had slowly been placing her exactly where she needed to be. But understanding the truth did not make the decision easier. Because now Esther faced something that every human heart eventually confronts. The moment when purpose collides with fear. She could remain silent, continue living safely within the palace walls, and hope someone else would solve the crisis. Or she could step into the uncertainty, risking everything for something greater than her own safety. And this is the uncomfortable part of waiting that people rarely talk about. Because sometimes, the reason God allows a long season of preparation is because the moment that follows will require more courage than you ever imagined. Esther did not respond immediately with confidence. First, she called for fasting, for prayer, for stillness before action. She understood that if she was going to step into that moment, it could not be done with human strength alone. And then she said the words that reveal the transformation waiting had produced inside her. If I perish, I perish. Those words reveal something powerful, not recklessness, not despair, but transformation. Because the Esther who first entered the palace was simply surviving her circumstances, adapting to a world she did not control, living day by day inside a story that seemed to be written by others. But the Esther who spoke those words had become someone different. Someone who finally understood that the waiting season had been shaping her courage all along. And this is where the deeper psychological pattern appears, because waiting does something strange to the human soul. At first it feels like delay, like inactivity, like a frustrating pause where nothing meaningful is happening. But slowly, quietly, it changes the way you think, the way you see risk, the way you understand purpose. Waiting strips away the illusion that we control the timing of our lives. It forces patience where we wanted speed, reflection where we wanted action, trust where we wanted certainty. And by the time the decisive moment finally arrives, you are no longer the same person who started the journey. Esther stepped toward the king, not knowing what the outcome would be, not knowing whether the door would open or close forever. But one thing had become clear. the season that once felt like silent waiting had actually been preparing her for the moment everything would change. And this is the part of the story that speaks directly to anyone living in a season that feels slow, confusing, or painfully quiet. Because from Esther's perspective, there were long stretches of life where nothing seemed to be happening. Years where her story appeared to move without any clear direction. Moments where she could not possibly see the hidden threads that were quietly connecting her present to a future moment of purpose. Yet when the crisis finally arrived, everything that once felt random suddenly revealed its meaning. The palace, the position, the timing, even the waiting itself. This is the mystery of how God often works in human lives, not through constant visible movement, but through quiet positioning, through circumstances that seem ordinary at the time, through delays that feel frustrating in the moment, but later reveal themselves as preparation. Because the truth many people struggle to accept is that God is often most active in the seasons when we feel the least progress. And perhaps that is the question waiting quietly inside your own life right now. If Esther had walked away during her years of uncertainty, if she had assumed that the silence meant nothing was unfolding, she might never have recognized the moment that would define her story. So maybe the season that feels like waiting in your life is not empty at all. Maybe, just like Esther, you are standing in a chapter where God is already arranging the moment that will one day make everything make sense. And if that is true, then the waiting is not the end of the story. It may actually be the beginning of the moment you were being prepared for all along. And with that thought resting quietly in the heart, the prayer can begin. Sovereign God, as this new morning begins, I quiet my heart before you. Sometimes waiting feels like silence, like nothing is moving, like my prayers are suspended in the air. Yet your word reminds me that heaven is never idle. In Book of Esther 4:14, a powerful truth echoes through history, that perhaps someone was placed in a moment for such a time as this. And today I believe the same about my life. Lord, even when I cannot see movement, you are working, aligning circumstances, preparing hearts, arranging moments I cannot predict. Just as you were moving quietly in the story of Esther before she ever stepped into her purpose. You are moving in my story now, behind the scenes, beyond my understanding, guiding everything according to your wisdom. And I choose to trust that my waiting is not empty, because you are already preparing what is coming. Lord, when I remember the journey of Esther, I see that your plans often unfold quietly, long before the moment of courage, before the decision that would change history. You were already positioning her, guiding events, placing her exactly where she needed to be. Nothing in her story was accidental. Every step was preparation. In Book of Esther 4:14, the question echoes with power, that perhaps she had come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Father, when my life feels uncertain, remind me that you are also positioning me. What feels like delay may actually be alignment. What feels like silence may be divine strategy. Even while I wait, you are opening doors, shifting hearts, and preparing the moment when purpose will rise. And I trust your hidden work, faithful Father. Sometimes the waiting tests my courage. It makes me question whether anything is truly changing. Yet when I look again at the story of Esther, I see that you were already working before she ever acted. You were arranging favor, placing the right people in the right moments, guiding unseen details that would later reveal your purpose. In Book of Esther 4:14, I hear a divine reminder that every life can carry a moment prepared by heaven, a moment that only you can orchestrate. Lord, help me trust the process before the breakthrough. Help me believe that even in quiet seasons you are preparing something greater than I can imagine. My waiting is not empty. It is filled with your hidden work, and your timing is always perfect. Sovereign Lord, when my patience grows thin, remind me that your plans move with perfect wisdom, not with human haste. The story of Esther did not unfold in a single moment. It developed step by step, favor by favor, until the exact time arrived for courage to rise. What seemed ordinary was actually preparation guided by your hand. I hear the quiet certainty that you place people in moments that matter. Father, if you positioned Esther for her time, I believe you are positioning me for mine. Even when I cannot trace your hand, I trust your heart. You are arranging opportunities, shifting circumstances, and shaping my character. So, I choose patience over panic, faith over fear, because while I am waiting, you are already working. Faithful God, while I wait, shape my heart so I am ready for the moment you are preparing. Do not let impatience push me ahead of your timing. Teach me the quiet strength that you built within Esther before she stood before the king. Her courage did not appear suddenly. It grew through trust, through surrender, through the quiet awareness that you were guiding every step. I hear the whisper of divine purpose, that a life can be positioned for a specific moment designed by heaven. Lord, prepare my spirit the same way. Grow wisdom where there was uncertainty. Grow courage where there was fear. Grow faith where there was doubt. So when the moment you prepared arrives, I will step forward with confidence, knowing you were working all along. Almighty God, when the waiting feels long and the outcome uncertain, strengthen my faith to remember that your plans are never paused. Even when I see stillness, heaven is moving. Just as in the story of Esther, you were weaving events together long before the decisive moment arrived. Conversations, favor, timing, and courage were all being prepared by your unseen hand. Hear the powerful reminder that purpose often appears at the exact moment you have designed. Father, help me trust what I cannot yet see. You are aligning the right people, opening the right doors, arranging the right moment. So I will not surrender to discouragement. I will wait with expectation, because even now, you are working in ways beyond my understanding. Eternal Father, my waiting is not empty. It is filled with your quiet activity. What I cannot see today, you are already arranging for tomorrow. The story of Esther reminds me that ordinary days can lead to extraordinary purpose when guided by your hand. I hear a timeless truth that lives are positioned by you for moments that matter, moments only you can orchestrate. So today, I release my worries and embrace faith. I will trust while I wait. I will believe while I cannot see, because you are already working, preparing the time, preparing the path, and preparing me for the purpose you designed. Amen. May the Lord's grace and peace accompany you today. Thank you for joining us in this moment of prayer.